Well, I've been here all my life. Dad asked me, he text messaged me, he said, hey, have you given your testimony to the church? And I said, I don't think so. But it's probably bits and pieces of it have been mentioned throughout the years. And he's like, well, I think you're right, but why don't you give it Sunday night? And I was like, okay. And so, I don't know, it's been like I've been trying to figure out how I was supposed to do this. Because, like I said, I've been here all my life. So, yes, I decided to start from the beginning. And here's the thing. I wrote 8 pages because I thought, well, I can't trust my memory because I'll be distracted. So I thought, well, I'll try reading it. I don't know how successful I'll be at reading what I wrote. But I didn't even finish. I just got to dating my wife. So I got to finish it. I did. Well, we're still kind of dating. Like my dad always said, I've been with her long enough now I should probably get married to her. I know she can cook. Some people think that's serious. It's not. They got married first, don't worry. And so did me and my wife. So, August 25th, 1985. Does anybody know what that great day was? That was the day I was born. I saw some pictures of myself. My dad found some and sent them to my wife because how much my children look like me. I'm sorry for that, by the way. Hopefully you'll grow out of it.
It's a good thing.
Well, in a way, yes, it is. This was the day of my birth. It was discussed not long ago that at some point we cease from being created and sin takes over and we begin to die. I know it's an unusual conversation to have, but when family gets together. And it was a kind of a profound thought because, my daughter had just been born and we're thinking about that like at some point in time she went from being fully created by God to then sin taking over the body. It is sometimes difficult to look back on my life and remember many things that happened. And not because it was bad, but that's just because how my brain works. I don't know if I just didn't pay attention, or I just was caught up in other things. I don't know what it was. Some people have that ability to where they can remember things. I am not. There are things that do stick out in my life. I will say life was interesting and fun growing up in a pastor's home. And that's not to say that there wasn't times where I was grieved. If you paid attention to this morning's message. Lots of correction. Dad and Mom wanted to raise us up with God being number one in our life, and it was very prevalent. There were many times in my early childhood that I was required to do things that I didn't always grasp. That didn't mean I was exempt from it. Oh, well, John doesn't understand or can't get it, so, we'll just look over him. No, I was still required to quote those scripture verses. I was still required to do the things I was supposed to do. And, I can't ever say that I was afraid of my father. I mean, I feared him. I wasn't scared of him. But there was something that just happened when I walked up in front of him and had to say the scripture verses. My brain went blank. My sisters, as I've been told, cried because they had just spent 15 minutes of their life trying to go over that verse with me, and I said it to them, but couldn't say it to my dad. That I don't remember. I have bits and pieces of remembering standing in front of him, but I don't remember my sisters crying over it because, again, one of those things where I just probably wasn't paying attention. And as time passed, I grew and started school. While I've been told that Grandma Humphrey, Miss Humphrey's mother, decided to take me under her wing because, again, I didn't do so well in testing going into school. But she said, don't worry about it. I'll help him. Well, that started a long, hard struggle for school for me. I'm not complaining. I'm just stating the fact that there were some things that I struggled with. And now, I might not have always had the best attitude about school, but I was always pushed and encouraged to work hard at it. Why? Because my father remembers what he did, and he didn't want that for his children. Between the ages of 5 and 6, I became aware that I was a sinner and needed to be saved. I was raised in a pastor's home, so I was a good kid, right? I didn't have to worry about anything. No, trust me, I was told by the world as a teenager, oh, you're a pastor's kid, you're going to be the most likely to party and follow the world and do all the stuff. And I said, bet. Okay, moving on. I was very scared of going to hell. I can distinctly remember being very scared of going to hell. And Dad and Mom never pushed any decision of salvation at our young ages. I can remember to this day that it was a Sunday evening. Now, we had the old pews. We didn't have the nice padding. And the Karbzinskis and us would swap. And I don't know how it ended up. Like some nights and Thursdays or Sundays we were over there, then sometimes we were over there. And I don't know why, but for a while we swapped back and forth. And I was sitting right there. We were getting ready for communion that Sunday evening. And Dad preached on the cross and Jesus Christ dying on the cross. And I knew that he had done that for me. So I wouldn't have to go to hell. And after service was over, now, here's the thing. I don't remember finding an adult. Because I've asked Mom about it, and she says, well, I don't remember you asking me. Maybe I did. But I distinctly remember praying. And I said, God, I don't want to go to hell. I want to be saved. And I was scared of hell. I didn't want to go to hell. And I mean, at the age of 5 and 6, what else are you scared of? You haven't really done anything else in your life at that point other than maybe lying to your parents. And at that age, you're still trying to figure out what that is. But I remember I said, God, I don't want to go to hell. I want you to become my Savior. Please save me. Now, so after that service, because I didn't want to take any more chances with my soul, that's when I asked him to save me. Now, this created a struggle. Why? Why did it create a struggle? Because we sit through many services where people would stand to give their testimonies, and they could give the date and the time and the month, everything of when they got saved. And then you'd have evangelists and preachers and people that would say that if you can't remember the date and time that you were saved, you probably aren't saved. And it'd just be like, whoa, wait a minute. Am I saved? And I struggled for a long time. Because there was a lot of doubt. There was a lot of doubt. Did I get saved? But I can always go back to that moment in time, not knowing the day, but I can always go back to that moment in time and say, I know I got saved because I remember asking. And I was always told that if I believed and I asked, then that was what happened. I got saved. So it was about the age of 13 that I felt something in my life. I was like, I struggled with that because I wasn't really sure what it was, but then I realized it was a call to preach. Now, to this point in time in my life, I can say that I haven't felt the call to pastor, but I felt a call to preach. And I guess at that point was realized that God knew that I was saved no matter what man said from their own wisdom or from off the top of their head. Now, I can't say at that point that, I didn't have, the devil will tickle your doubt and say, hey, are you sure? But it was at that point in time that I realized that something had happened. And I figured the Lord wouldn't burden me to want to preach if I hadn't been saved. Titus 2:14, it says, who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from all iniquity and purify unto himself a peculiar people zealous of good work. We always use the same verses over and over, and it's not anything wrong with those verses, but I figure he came to redeem us from all our iniquity and to purify. And why did he purify? He purified unto himself a peculiar people. Have you ever been called an oddball? A weirdo? Well, sometimes there's nothing wrong with it, unless you're really weird. Because you can be weird for the wrong reasons, too. Don't be that weird. Trust me. And we're supposed to be zealous of good works. Now, I'm not going to say, and that'll come later on down the road here, but I'm not going to say that I didn't have my struggles with doing the wrong things, but I always had my mind to do the right thing. I always had in my mind to what was right to do. What's the good thing to do? Another 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 19 through 26. I can't do anything without reading the Bible to you because it's just not the right. Nevertheless, nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are his. All right? The Lord knows. Why? Because You can read the Bible and you can have your doubts, but you want to know what? The Lord knows.
Right.
And let everyone that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity. Now, that's a challenge to us as Christians, that if we have called upon the name of the Lord and He is our Savior, our goal in our life is to depart from iniquity. Pastor talked about it this morning in his message, that there's foolishness bound in the heart of the child. Well, there's iniquity and sin bound in the heart of the Christian, and we need to depart from it. But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use, and prepared unto every good work. And it says, if a man therefore purge himself from these. Okay, so it does take our effort.
Right.
He did a lot of stuff for us, but it does take our effort to create a vessel that is worthy.
Right.
And prepared for every good work. Flee also youthful lusts, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace with them that call out of a pure heart. But foolish and unlearned questions avoid, knowing that they do gender strifes. And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach, and patient, in meekness instructing those that oppose themselves, if God peradventure will give them repentance to the acknowledging of the truth, and that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil, who are taken captive by him at his will. Now, I read that because these are things that, as I grew in Christ and as I sat in church and I tried to pay attention, I say tried, so it wasn't always successful. But as I tried to pay attention, that there were just these things that stood out to me. What we're supposed to be. Have I ever striven to be gentle unto all men? Am I apt to teach? Well, I found out as I became a father, I'm not so inclined as a teacher. And that's something I had to learn to do. Why? Because when my oldest was born, you expect, not for me, I just automatically assumed, well, he would already know how to do everything. He's absorbed it through everything. No, I had to learn how to teach. And I had to learn these things. Colossians chapter 4, verse 17. Now, this is a verse that I have partially claimed as a life verse, I suppose, if you want to call it that. There's another one too. It says, and say to Archippus, take heed to the ministry which thou hast received in the Lord, that thou fulfill it. Now, being raised in church and being raised in a pastor's house and being around different kinds of ministries, I had an understanding of what a ministry was. And I had an understanding of what a burden was and a call was. I didn't know it perfectly, but I had an understanding of it. And when this verse showed up in my life, and I didn't put a date next to it in my Bible, but I took it as, I am supposed to take heed to the ministry which thou hast received in the Lord. Whatever the Lord has given to me, I am supposed to go and do it.
Amen.
Whether it is just simply being here and helping, or whether it ends up being the song leader when I can't really sing, or whatever it may be. And now, have I fulfilled myself in every one of these positions to the best of my ability? Unfortunately, I have to say no, because I am human and I like to complain. It's just a fact. Now, I can remember this next verse, and when it came along in my life was because it was from when I graduated from high school, in Isaiah chapter 26. Out of all the verses that are in the Bible, and I can't even remember how I ended up narrowing it down to this verse, but it was my duty in my class to pick out our class verse. In Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 3, it says, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. Now, yes, I was 17 when I picked out this verse, so it's later on in my testimony here, but it's something that I had to learn, that the only way I'm going to have real peace about anything in my life was if I kept my focus on God, not on what Jonathan wanted to do.
Right.
So moving on, we go back to starting in my teenage years. At 13, when I felt the call to preach, I didn't know what to do about it. Within those years, Dad started the 5-minute preach-off, and I had the opportunity to preach at youth nights as well. One big thing I can remember from my teenage years was Jeremy Evans was my youth pastor or youth leader. And one of the many lessons, because here was a man who put some time and effort into us as teenagers, because he didn't just order a lesson, he sat down and he made all of his own lessons for the year. Now, it was different back then in the fact that we only were through the school year. We didn't go through the summer as well, but still. And one of his lessons for the whole semester was on this one verse, 1 Timothy 4:12. And it's a perfect verse for young people. It says, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, and in purity." Now, he went over each one of those words in a lesson, and he taught us about it. He taught us about what it was, what we're supposed to be. And I took that as, but he also emphasized highly, let no man despise thy youth. Why? Because it's easy to be a teenager and have an adult look at you like you are nothing but a bug and I'm going to squash you on my windshield. Because why? For one, the adult in some cases just gets jaded with life and they forget about the energy and the excitement that a young person has, and they want to just curb that enthusiasm to what that person could possibly do in the future. And then I also learned through those lessons that even at 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, I could be an example to somebody, even older than myself.
Amen.
Because I, through the Lord, not through myself, could make the right choices, make the right decision. I could have the right testimony, and it could affect somebody else. And I'm not talking about somebody out in the world. It says, be an example of the believers.
Right. That's right.
So within my own church, within wherever I traveled in a circle of going to churches and whatever it was, I could be an example to somebody. And of course, unfortunately, due to the fashion of time and the flesh, of being a teenager, it kicked up, and, I began to worry about me, myself, and I. And I did the things that I wanted to do, and I went after things that I wanted to know. And I struggled with it and I struggled with many things as a teenager, and I'm not here to confess sin or fault, so I'm not going to tell you what those were. But I did start to dilute myself in the fact that, well, if I don't include anybody else in what I'm doing, I'll be fine. Because then I won't be pulling anybody else into this sin or this habit that I've created that isn't right or good for me. But of course, God's word swoops in and smacks me in the back of the head and says, nope, you're wrong. In Romans chapter 14, there is a verse that I'll point out to you. But it says, we'll start reading in verse 5. It says, one man esteemed one day above another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it into the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day to the Lord, he did not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks, and he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not and giveth God thanks. For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself. For whether we live unto the Lord, and whether we die unto the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are the Lord's. So, at some point in time, I'm going to affect something or someone. And I know one thing. Even if nobody else, even if not one person in this church ever found out the things that I did, you know who I would affect? I would affect the Lord. Why? Because the Lord and I are supposed to have a relationship. I'm supposed to love the Lord with all my heart. Now, I had the privilege of picking out the songs we sang today, knowing that I was going to give this testimony. And every single one of those songs at some point in my life has affected me a lot. So each of us have our preferences. Each of us have our way of doing things, and we can see that in the first part of that passage I read. But no matter what that is, no matter what, You don't live to yourself, and you're not going to die to yourself. Why? Because out of all this, we still can affect the Lord. And we're not going to affect him negatively, but that relationship, as was compared to this morning's message, that relationship between a father and a son, or a father and a daughter, or a mother and a daughter, and a mother and a son, whatever that is, that relationship can be affected. And that communication level can be affected. Why? Because I know when I did get caught doing something wrong, the relationship that I had between these two people here on the front row and myself was affected. And I had to be told, well, I can't trust you right now, so we're just going to have to let that build back up. And then, of course, Luke 8, verse 17 says, "For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be made known and come abroad." What's that? One day, what you think is secret, it ain't going to be secret no more, buddy. Because why? Because I found out that even if I did it alone, and even if I did things by myself and I didn't figure it was going to affect anybody but myself, at some point in time, something is going to be made known. And here's the thing too, is though although you may not ever know specific things about me, at some point in time, my ability to raise my children is going to be affected by the choices that I made as a young person too. Because I created that. And my father warned me about it when I was young. He said, "John, if you let things get into your mind, if you let things happen to you, it will never go away. It will be stuck there, and you will never forget it, and it will come up at the most inconvenient times in your life." And unfortunately, I have found out the hard way in some of that stuff. Because unfortunately, I did not heed the advice of a wiser man. Why? Because he also has experienced it in his own life. And at the age of 17, I became very aware that I needed to change some things in my life, so I proceeded to figure out what I had to do to eliminate some things out of my life. And of course, I couldn't do that without the help of God. And I can remember distinctly talking to a young man who had been in church all his life as well, and who had been around a very wise Christian man, and that was his father. And, when you're Christian teenagers, you kind of wallow in self-pity about certain things. And I said, well, at this age, I realize what I've been doing isn't right. I know the attitude that I have isn't right. I said, nope. As soon as I get old enough, graduate, get out of here, I ain't ever going to step a foot back in church, because I saw what people did to my dad. I was like, what? Okay. I said, wow. And that kind of opened my eyes to something. Why? Because there was somebody who was very bitter and didn't like what they saw. And although I saw some things go on in our church and it affected my dad never blamed God, and I doubt his dad did either. But I don't know if it was just a difference in personality. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it, but I know that the Lord saved me from making that decision in my life, and I thank him every day. And I wish that young man would have made a different decision, because as far as I can tell today, he still isn't in church. And by no means am I perfect, but God has helped me in many ways in my life. It was also at this point that I needed to figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. Funny thing is I'm still trying to figure that out. Yeah. And of course, I also knew, after spending about 6 years with Miss Humphrey as junior high and high school teacher, that if I wanted to make God laugh, tell him what I was going to do with my life. Because from her own testimony, and she mentioned it many times in openings and in devotions, if you want to make God laugh, tell him what you're going to do with your life. Why? Because she wanted to be a school teacher, and she went to school for it, and then she was able to spend time in Africa for a while, and then she came back home, and she said she wanted to be a teacher for little kids. She didn't want to deal with high schoolers. Well, guess what she got stuck with? But she was able to create a relationship with all of us, and I appreciate that to this day. Even within those years, getting close to graduating from high school, I can remember at one point I brought my dad an early enlistment paperwork for the Marine Corps, and he refused to sign it. Now, how rude was that? No, it wasn't rude. he had some wisdom that I did not. And, he also knew that at that point in time in my life when I had graduated, or that when I had given my life to Christ to preach or to learn, he said, you need to go to Bible school before you do anything else in your life. But even then, graduation days coming along, 2003. I know, that was a long time ago. It came in a whirlwind, lots of hard work, lots of time sitting after school with Miss Humphrey, trying to get all my English and everything else done that I had to get done. Because remember at the beginning when I said I struggled through school? Yeah, it didn't end until I graduated. And then it started up again in 2004, even in Bible school. And it was a wonder to behold. I, Jonathan Heaton, had finally earned my diploma. And I was salutatorian of the class. And everybody has to laugh about that I tell. Because well, how many people did you graduate with? I was like, 3. I was like, and I earned it, all right? I earned it. Because the other kid that I was in class with should have been probably in contention with valedictorian of the class. Because he was very smart himself. But we'll jump back a few months in time, and we can go back to the dining room table of my parents' house, and I can remember Brother Weldon Jones looking straight into my eyes and asking me, do you want to go on a mission trip to Mexico? And, I'm working, and so the first thing in my mind is, can I afford to do that? But deep down inside my heart, I was like, yeah, I really want to. But I wasn't sure, and so with a bit of hesitation but encouragement from my father and saying that the church would help pay for it since I was a teenager of the church and it would be a missions trip, I was like, sure, I'm on board. And within that time period was also when my father had been invited to preach down at the Blowout, which came along in September of 2003. I'm out of school. All my peers, my younger friends, all these people have gone back to school or started college. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do. And of course, Dad being invited to Bible Baptist Church in Pensacola, Florida, it was kind of a big deal for the family. Why? Because it was something that he never thought would ever happen. And so we all went down. And as we got down there and as we started getting involved with things, I just had this peace and this understanding and this thing telling me this is where you need to be. Now, it's scary because what? Pensacola is what? 1,300 miles? 17-hour drive. Well, it's a long drive. I haven't really gone anywhere on my own, and here I am going, this is where I need to be. And it was at that point that I came to my father and I said, you know what, I think I know what I'm supposed to be doing next year. So time moves forward by a few months. Kit Jeffries, my brother Paul's roommate down there in Toledo, Ohio at the time, was going down to the Blowout again in February. So through him, I purchased a plane ticket and then we flew down to Pensacola and I was able to go to the Blowout. Well, while I was at the Blowout, I got to see Brother Jones one last time before he headed back to Mexico. And we were both really excited about my trip to Mexico. I believe was it March or April, I think. I can't remember. April? April, okay. So, again, once again, my time in Pensacola was a blessing. And of course, it's a different environment at the Blowout. It's not a normal, it's just like when a Bible conference or something happens here. I mean, you got people preaching at you, people excited, shouting, amen, singing loud songs. It's a great environment to be in if you want to be excited about something. Amen. And, of course, weeks have passed, and I have returned home from Florida, and unfortunately, my dad receives some news that Brother Weldon Jones had been killed in a car accident while driving up to his mountain property where the church held their youth camp and teen camp. It was a very sad time, and we were unsure of my trip and whether it would go forward. And Mrs. Jones seemed to think it would still be a good idea that I come and spend time with her son, Raymond, because I think at that point in time, Raymond had lost his wife in a car accident, a year or two prior to that. So within a few years period of time, Raymond had lost his wife, an unborn child, and his father. And she wanted somebody to be there with him. So I continued on with that plan. And of course, so the one of the main reasons I was even going was to help out with their teen camp and their young kids youth camp. So with that unfortunate circumstance happening, we weren't sure if they had just decided they weren't going to do it. And when I flew into Mexico, a missionary friend of theirs in Guadalajara, who had a ministry to the deaf people, met me at the airport and picked me up. And so he kind of took me around, and he took me down to a taco stand. Now, if you haven't had real authentic Mexican tacos, the stuff at Taco Bell and the shelves at Walmart, no. And it was through him that he showed me some of the articles that he had clipped about Brother Jones's accident, and he kind of explained some things that had happened and what it was all about. And there was a lot. Let's put it this way: you can say whatever you want to say about the police and people here in the United States, but there is a lot of shady stuff that goes on in some of these countries. And there was a lot of people paid off, and there was a lot of heads turned on certain things that happened in this situation. Now, to give you a clip of the situation, he was in a pickup truck. He had like 6 or 7 teenagers in the back of the pickup truck. He had 2 teenagers sitting next to him in the front of the pickup truck, and then there was a couple vans behind him. And they were all headed up to the mountain property, like I said. Now, a church from Oregon was visiting, so they were going up there to see it. And when that truck had crossed the center line, it had a big, huge welded cage on the side of it, and that thing went straight up inside it. And unfortunately, he wasn't the only one killed in the accident. I can't even remember the national pastor whose daughter was killed. I know he was a really funny guy because he came to the teen camp, because he was able to convince Mrs. Jones to go ahead and have the teen camp, and we could do it in remembrance of his daughter and of Brother Jones. So with that being said, we went ahead. I mean, I'd already been there for about a week, and so within the end of that first week, we went down to Guadalajara, and we went to Sam's Club and Office Depot and all these other big places and bought a bunch of supplies. Because if you don't know it, the churches that some of these missionaries pastor, they don't take up offerings. So all the stuff that some of these missionaries do literally comes out of the money that we send them. So it comes out of their pocket to provide and to do all these things. So we went down there, we picked up all the supplies, and then Raymond and I started going up to the mountain and getting things prepared for it. Now, I'm going to say it was a good time. It was a good time. I saw a lot of things that I'd never expect to see. Met some very nice and I'll tell you this: if any of you are interested in sports, that's the wrong place to learn how to play soccer. I'm just saying, because the one-legged kid who had his leg blown off with electricity was actually an amateur going pro soccer player at 16. He was still doing better than I was, and he was hopping around with a prosthetic. And but I had a good time. I was of the age around most of those people. So even though I couldn't understand what they were saying to me, and they probably couldn't understand what I was saying to them, we still created a bond. We even had funny moments where, like, because the girls' tents, so get this, they didn't have dormitories built there. You had to come with your tent. And so this camp was set up for other missionaries in Mexico to bring their teenagers. So it wasn't just Brother Jones's teenagers. It was other churches from other areas of Mexico would drive up to this camp. So they would have to have their tent set up. And so all of us older people would sit up at the campfire and wait until everybody fell asleep before we would depart ways, because we didn't want the boys from over here and the girls from over here coming and going and doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Well, I brought, just because I wanted to make some memories, I brought a little digital recorder. Yeah, they had those in 2004. Can you believe that? It wasn't a tape. But I had this digital recorder, and I'm going to tell you right now, I mean, I'm not trying to make offense of anything, but there was a girl in one of them tents, and boy, could she snore. I felt bad for her. Yes, boy, could she snore. And it was the tent closest to the fire. And so Brother Jones is talking to the guys, and other missionaries are talking in Spanish, and then Brother Jones is telling me what they say, and we go back and forth. And so it finally came down to the fact that I should crawl up to the tent and record this. So I did, because I thought it would be funny. No. So the next morning, with much chagrin and sadness, and one of the guys gets up there and starts talking to the teenagers and says, we have this visitor from so many thousands of miles away. They come home here to help us out, and they're disappointed in what they had to encounter, and he's very disappointed in you teenagers, and blah, blah, and like he had these kids on the edge of their seat, like, what, who did what? And so he's got one of those like little mics, and so he's like, now you got to listen to what we heard, because I'm super disappointed to you. And he starts playing that snoring. And I thought there were some boys specifically, were about ready to fall out of their seat. But I made memories like that. I can think back on, there's things like that I can remember. So that trip comes to an end. I come back to the United States. I come back and I start working again. Now I'm working at McDonald's in Rose City there. And I finish up working there. I'm working till July. Because why? Remember back in 2003 in September when I had said, well, I know what I have to do next year. So in July of 2004, right at our week of camp meeting, I pack up my car and all my belongings in the car, and I start my journey to Pensacola, Florida. Now on the way down, I pick up Kit Jeffries, and he kind of is there to drive with me down. And so I get down there, and I'm supposed to be staying at somebody's house for a short period of time until I can find roommates and the other things. And I didn't know what that person looked like. I'd never met him. And then Brother Strauss, it's a missionary we support there to Brazil. Brother Strauss came up to me and introduced himself, says, hey, I remember your dad your dad preaching the blowout, and starts talking. And he's like, well, brother, he says, if you can't, he says, I can point him out, because I was looking for his roommate, because he had already gone back, the guy I was supposed to stay with had already gone back to Montana for the summer. So he hadn't made it back yet. So I didn't know what his roommate looked like. And so he's like, well, if he shows up for church, because he worked a late shift at Albertsons, which is a grocery store. He says, if he shows up tonight, I'll point him out to you. But if not, you can stay at my house. You'll just have to get up with me to go to work and leave, because I don't want you at the house with my wife and kids. I was like, no, I completely understand. I appreciate your offer. Well, thankfully, the man showed up. So he came and pointed him out to me. So then I was able to have a place to stay. But prior to that, I drove to Fort Walton Beach with Kit, dropped him off at the airport, and drove back to Pensacola. Now here I am in a 93 Pontiac Bonneville, loaded to the gills, like the trunk's loaded, the back seat's loaded. And at that point in time, I didn't know who I was supposed to be staying with, and I was scared. I was an 18-year-old, almost 19-year-old young man. I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I can't quit. I can't leave here, because why? Be in front of God and every person in my church at the time, I had said I was going there and I was going to graduate. And I felt that was what I had to do. Many things happened while I was down there, and many people made impressions on my life. And I knew that I couldn't quit and that I needed to learn as much as I could. There were still many struggles, and one of them was Miss Meacham's English class. Oh, goodness gracious. Thought I was done with English when I graduated from high school. But Doc said, no, if you're going to be making outlines and doing all this other stuff, you need to learn English, especially if you're going to write things that people got to read. I was like, well, I don't plan on letting people read this stuff right off of my writing, Doc. I even have a word processor that corrects my writing now. And through all those experiences, through all those relationships that I was able to create while I was there, I grew. I was only 21, 22 years old when I graduated and came back. That was 2007. But I wasn't sticking around Pensacola, Florida, because there's a vortex down there. There is. There's a vortex. There's people who have graduated from Bible school and have never left there. And I was like, I'm not going to be one of them people. So I graduated, was it Thursday night? We did our whole graduation service. Friday morning, they have another meeting And some of the former graduates will will be there, and they'll preach and do different things. So that ended. Well, Mom and Dad were driving up to Alabama, and they were going to go to a church there. Well, I started packing my stuff Saturday morning. I had the back end of that S10 almost completely packed. Went to church Sunday morning, finished up throwing some stuff in my truck, put a tarp over it, and I was to Alabama by Sunday night for service. It's like, I ain't sticking around here. I'm gone. So I came home. Why? Because I had always felt a call to come back here. I don't know why, but I never had peace about anything else, but I was never told no, not to come back here. So I figured this is where I was supposed to be. Now, when I came back, because even when I left, there was quite a few people still here. 03, 04, there were still quite a few people here. But the problem of it was there were people in the seats, but nobody willing to do anything. So part of the reason why I thought I was supposed to come back here was because if I came back, then I could help. Well, when I came back in 07, there weren't quite as many familiar faces still here. A lot had left. And that could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. I don't know. Depends upon how you look at it. But there were quite a few new people's faces sitting in the pews. And the thing was is almost every single one of those new people were excited about helping out in church. So I come back to sit. Why? Because my dad, even though I'm his son, isn't going to take a job from somebody else to give it to me. That's just not how things work. And I knew that. So I didn't expect to come back here to get something as soon as I saw what was going on, but I figured I'm here. I still need to be here. I did start out helping with the teenage group at the time. I became a helper to Jeremy and Curran and helping with the teenagers at that time. And I'm not even sure how they're old enough to be out of high school themselves because I don't feel like it's been that much time, but there has been that much time. So we're at a point in time in my life. I'm 21, 22 years old. I've graduated from Bible college. I never really looked for a girlfriend or a serious relationship while I was in Pensacola, Florida. One stumbled into my lap, it lasted for a short period of time. It was over. I didn't take anything from it or leave anything with it. I was just like, whatever, it happened, it's over. So, but I always said I wanted to graduate from college before I even got into a serious relationship because I didn't want to be distracted. And I can be distracted very easily if you haven't known that about myself yet. I don't blame you at all. And she's leaving just about the time I start talking about her, so that's good. Well, yeah, but I don't have to see her. It's just we'll just say this so she doesn't have to look at me right in the eyes, and I have to be. Then I'll become scared. So, at that point in time, I'm graduated from college. I'm back here at home, and I'm 21, 22 years old. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to start looking for a girlfriend. I'm going to start looking for a wife. And I looked for. It was a short period of time in history, and I was like, you know what? This is stupid. I ain't doing this. And I just said, you know what, Lord? I said, if you want me to find a wife, you're going to have to bring her to me because I ain't dealing with it. And I went on, and by that point in time, I had started working for a company, and I was working 12, 14, 15, 16 hours a day anyways, and I was gone that many hours, if not more. And I worked for months at that schedule, and Dad handed me an invitation to a spring fling, which was for the single activity group down in Toledo, Ohio, where at the time, my family and my brother was associate pastor down there. And so I was like, you know what? I'll go. I got nothing better to do. It's either working or at home with my parents. But I headed down there. Now, I had been at Hope Baptist Church. My sister got married to Brad in 96. So I had been to Hope Baptist Church probably from 96 all the way up to probably when I graduated from high school, almost every year for their Bible conference and other things. And so, I knew almost everybody there that was my age or younger, a little older. I knew. So now the spring thing had a bunch of different churches singles there. So I they had the popcorn preaching going on, and it was my turn, so I stand up. I was given a verse, and I was given 5 minutes, and then I had to preach on it for 2. I was given the verse, I look at it, okay, so I open up the verse, I start studying, write a few things down. So then all of a sudden it's my turn, and I stand up, and the back door to the auditorium opens, and this girl walks through the door, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what church she's from. So I go through it. I sit down. Well, then she gets assigned to our team because we're all parts of teams, and we're all given tasks and games to play and do different things. Well, she gets assigned to my team, and I'm like, man, she is one good-looking girl. I don't know who she is. And so we were playing this one game, and she's like highly involved into it. Because I'm the type of person when I'm in a new situation where I'm just going to stand back and I'm going to watch. Like, I don't get highly involved until I know you. And even this is, every time I went to Hope Baptist Church, it didn't matter. That was just the way things were. Why? Because I was still somebody new there. There was a lot of people there. So I was like, I'll just sit back. So I'm watching them, and this other kid, this guy, and her are arguing about how they're supposed to build this graham cracker house with frosting and graham crackers. And it's just, no, we got to do that. No, we got to do this. So I was like, what's going on there? So I was like, oh, she already must have a boyfriend. Oh, well. Well, come to find out that's her brother. So I was like, well, no wonder they were arguing that way. They were butting heads because, well, they know each other really well. And I'm kind of a shy person, whether you believe it or not, especially when it comes to girls. And so I was like, she's good looking and all, but I'm too scared to go talk to her because I'm a scaredy cat. But through so much persuasion from another friend that I had down there, she convinced me to talk to her, and I don't regret that. We went on our first date in Mother's Day, and time passes, and I can remember asking my mom. I was like, Mom, how do you know when you're supposed to marry somebody? How do you know that that's the person that you're supposed to marry? And she, of course, in all her wisdom, she says, you'll just know once you've prayed about it. What kind of answer is that? It was the right answer. But I was hoping for a profound answer. It was like, So at that point is where I stopped typing because I ran out of time. But it was at that point where I realized that she was the one for my life. And through many phone conversations and text messaging, because it was a long-distance relationship. It's 3.5 hours away. I knew what kind of engagement ring she wanted because, let me tell you, she didn't forget to tell me about that. So I went and got an engagement ring. And, in Valentine's Day of 2009, because, her parents were like, we don't want you to get married until she's graduated from college. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And I add this stuff because it's part of my life. It's the things that I've learned from. But I remember going down there. It must have been in January of 2009. They had a huge snowstorm down there. And my father-in-law had snowmobiles and all this other stuff. They would come up north and snowmobile a lot. And so I get down there, and they got I don't know how many feet of snow in the farm fields and all this stuff. And so Amber's coming home from work. I'm there waiting for her, and her dad comes in and is like, "Hey, you want to go on a ride with the snowmobiles?" And I was like, "Well, sure, I guess. I got to wait for her to get ready anyways." And so I was like, "Well, let's go." Well, I'm thinking we're gonna go out in the fields and ride in the fields. And I think I toured almost half of Monroe County. Now, if you've never seen Monroe County, that's a big county to tour. And finally, I was able to get to a point where we stopped. And I was like, "Okay, I got to ask now." I was like, "Hey," he's like, "What?" I was like, "Can I marry your daughter?" "Well, John, I knew this day was coming," and he goes off in this long spiel, and just like, "Yep." So he gets done, and I just said, "So is that yes or no?" He's like, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, you can." So in February, I asked her to marry me. Now, it was Valentine's Day. It's supposed to be really romantic. I won't tell you what she called me because she thought I was joking. Because on the phone conversation the day before, she was like, "Is there something sparkly in my future?" I was like, "I don't have the money for that." Now, I don't know how I wouldn't have had the money for it because I was living at my parents' house and I was making quite a good amount of money at the time working. But she didn't understand that, I guess. But we laugh about it now. We laugh about it now. I'm not saying anything bad about her because it was just funny how it ended up being. And there, ever since then, because I never had a really rough life. I didn't have to experience a lot of horrible things, and I still haven't. But at that point in time was when I started to really grow, because then I married her, in one job loss, and then I start working and just making enough money to be able to barely get by, and she's working as well, and then I finally get a job where I can make a decent amount of money, or a better amount of money, and it's less than I thought it was going to be. And then I start, I joined remember Dad wouldn't sign the paperwork for the Marine Corps. Well, now I'm married, I can make my own decisions, so I joined the Army. I joined the Army National Guard. Well, I love my dad, and there have been many times where he's posed the question of I don't even know where you guys even want to do this. I'm like, well, here's a man who says he wished he never would have got out. He honors the service of the people in our military, and how does he not expect that to affect his children? And so even though I had the call in my life to preach, and even though I was married, and even though I was to that point in my time in my life, there was just one more thing that had always been itching in the back of my head that because I don't really talk about a lot of things to a lot of people. Like things that are open, I'll talk to you about. But if there's something in my mind, and it even aggravates my wife to this day. Why don't you talk to me about this kind of stuff? So sometimes I talk to her about stuff, then she gets bored about it. I'm like, see, this is why I don't talk to you about stuff. But so it came down to a point where I was like, there was nothing else in my life going on. There was the church, but I figured if I join the National Guard, I'll still be here at church. I'll do the other stuff. So I started a six-year journey of my life that I won't regret. But when the 6 years was done, I realized I was done. There was no signing another contract. There was none of that, because at that point in time, I realized that I just needed to move on. I learned what I needed to learn, and I needed to move on with what the Lord had for me. Now, I struggle with some things, getting let go from jobs. And the thing of it is a lot of it comes along in the financial realm of life. Because in today's modern America, that's where it can hit you the hardest, is when it involves your money. Because that's how we have to live here in the United States. And so you have to learn to be thankful. I have to learn to be thankful with what the Lord has provided for me. Because about the time where you think everything's going to go right, the Lord says, well, we'll just do this over here. And when I got let go from that job at Sandvik, and I was just like, what? Why? Because it happened to be on the day my daughter was due, Ava, I'm sitting over here. It was her due date that they pulled me in the office and they let me go. And I was like, oh, okay. And I had to be escorted off the property, because that's the way they do things in certain places. I had to be escorted off the property by a man whose dad knew my father really well, and he did not want to have anything to do with this, because he was like, I was like, I'm not mad at you, okay? I'm not mad at you, I'm not mad at anybody here. I'm not mad at all. Because at that point in time in my life, with one child who was 4 and another one about ready to be born, I had figured out a few things in my life that I was just like, you know what? The Lord has taken care of me thus far. Why? Because there's a house over here that I rented shortly after I came out of basic training in AIT. And when I first went to that house, and my dad contacted his friend, and he put me in contact with his brother here over in Long Lake, and I talked to him. I was supposed to pay $600 a month, and then I was going to be responsible for everything in that house by the agreement that the older brother had. Now, time passes by. I'm living at my brother Joel's house. I'm sorry, Joel. Steffi. Oh, I'm sorry, Steffi. Yes, you too. And my wife is pregnant with Jackson, and I'm like, I'm not really sure what's going to work out here. And over a week goes by, almost 2 weeks goes by, I haven't heard a word from anybody about this house over here. I'm like, I don't know. So I started looking at the apartments in Rose City. I started doing all kinds of stuff. And then one Sunday morning, dad came in. He's like, well, did you hear what happened to Floyd? I was like, no, what happened? Well, he took his own life. I was like, what? But here's the man that I was supposed to be sitting down with, signing a rental agreement to rent his mom's house. I was like, well, what in the world do we do now? Well, the guy that my dad went to high school with, Mr. Tomberry, was coming in from Washington State to take care of all the affairs because his mother was in a nursing home in Tawas and all this other stuff going on. So he's got all this stuff going on. Plus I have my stuff going on, and we're supposed to be renting this house. And he sits down and he goes, because he was a landlord down in Flint and Bay City and Saginaw area for a lot of years when he worked for GM. And he said, okay, I'll charge you $500 a month. So no, it's $100 less a month. And he said, well, once I get back to Washington and I can get everything situated, then we can switch the electric over to your name. Because him not being the executive of the state, there was a lot of paperwork and just a lot of things he was dealing with. So I was like, okay. So, granted, I'm in a period of time in my life where I'm not making a lot of money, my wife's not making a lot of money, and we're just trying to trust the Lord to get us through everything that we need. And for over 2.5 years, that man paid the electric bill on that house. The first year I lived there, I could barely make a full rent payment. So I'd send him what I could, and I'd apologize, and he's like, don't worry about it. And, tax return time would come in. I needed, just say, $2,300 to be able for back rent to send him money. Guess what money I had from tax return? I had enough money to be able to write that man a check. And I can remember sitting in that recliner by my telephone, writing that $2,300 check to be able to send to him in back rent and what I owed him, because I could never, there were some months I was able to, and other months I wasn't. Some months I was able to pay a lot, and other months I wasn't. So I made up that rent check, and I was just like, Lord, I don't even know what I'm going to do now. And I got a phone call. Hey, this is John Jackson. I'm a supervisor here at Sandvik. I was wondering if you're looking for your job, if you're looking for the job still. And I was like, well, matter of fact, I am. Well, here's the thing. I didn't apply for that job. But what I had done was I had given Tom Wilcox a stack of my resumes, and he put them in his locker. And whenever a job would come available, he would hand it to the supervisor. So I didn't even know they were looking for anybody. All I know was I got a phone call when I most needed it. Why? Because driving school bus is nice, in theory, but it wasn't paying the bills that I needed it to pay. And so for a few years, the Lord provided that job there. And it opened up a job. Once I got let go from there, then a job opened up where my brother was working at, Lottie Fabrication. And I can complain all I want and all day long about the things that have happened at my workplace, because there's complaints that, but here's the thing. I've always been taken care of. And it isn't because of the man who owns the company. It isn't because of my stellar work ethic and people feeling sorry for me. It's because the Lord has provided those things thus far. Amen. And now I have 4 children. I've been married for 12, going on 13 years. And I don't even know what's happened. Here I am going on 37 this year. And I'm like, wait, I just graduated from high school. But if I stop and I think, and I'm not trying to think back and to remember, all the bad things, but if I can look back at everything that the Lord has done for me, over the least, for sure, the last 12 years of my life, there were things that I never paid attention to until it was done with. And that's the things that the Lord's done in my life. Now, that's kind of I could tell stories for probably another hour or two, and you're probably already ready and bored. But the Lord has opened up a lot of doors in my life, and just the things that I was involved with in Pensacola, with the ministries and the things that I learned there, to the things that I've learned here. And it's been a blessing. Amen. I can't always say I had the right attitude about it. I'm sorry about that. And I can't say that I haven't always complained, and I'm sorry about that too. But just remember, as I look at my life and what the Lord's done for me, you can get through any hard time. You can. Amen. It might hurt. It might hurt right now, but the Lord will eventually get you through it, because He's never left. Amen. We sometimes forget that He's beside us, but He's never left. All right. You guys are dismissed.